You're watching CTS, family-friendly television.
Hi and welcome to Rhonda Live. On the show today, freedom of choice or censorship. All copies of Hitler's Mein Kampf have been pulled from Chapters and Indigo bookstores and deleted from the company's online ordering service. CEO Heather Reisman says the book is hate literature. The first volume of Mein Kampf, or My Struggle, was published in 1925, long before Adolf Hitler came to power. The second volume came out in 1927. The book conceals little of Hitler's ultimate plan. Within the pages of Mein Kampf, he reveals a program of blood and terror in overwhelming frankness. He boldly expresses his racist ideology, with Aryans described as the genius race and Jews as the parasite race. There's no doubt this is an ugly book written by an ugly man, but should it be banned in bookstores? That's a question we're asking today on Rhonda Live. My first guest today supports the decision to pull Mein Kampf off of the shelves at Chapters and Indigo bookstores. We're joined in studio by Manuel Prutschi. He's a National Director of Community Relations for the Canadian Jewish Congress. Manuel, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Why do you say this book, that Heather Reisman made a bold and even a courageous decision?
Why? I'm sorry, I didn't catch the question.
Why do you say that she made a courageous decision to pull this book off of?
Yeah, because I think she made a decision of conscience. In our view, our preference would be that the book not be carried commercially. It is obviously a book that has historical significance, and it's important for people in an educational or scholarly context for understanding Nazism and anti-Semitism and racism and so on. But at the same time, it's obviously a virulently anti-Semitic book. It still today has great attraction to the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists. And it is the political manifesto of Hitler, and it's a manifesto which the current neo-Nazis consider to be relevant to today, not to issues 50 years ago. So in our view, there's no need for it to be available commercially, and particularly because the edition, the only edition really that is sold, is a raw edition of the manifesto. It might be different if it were thoroughly annotated and it had significant commentary which place it properly in historical context. But as the raw manifesto, in our view, our preference is that it not be in commercial bookstores, and that's why we congratulated her on her decision.
You say that this is not, however, an issue of censorship. Why?
Correct. Well, because the book itself is not being banned. It is simply not going to be carried by one particular bookseller, admittedly a huge bookseller, admittedly, but nonetheless the book is available in other bookstores. In our view, the decision to sell it or not to sell it is up to an individual bookseller to make in accordance with his or her judgment, and it is readily available in libraries, so that it is not really an issue of censorship or of banning.
Well, essentially, though, this book is banned at Chapters, Indigo, and Kohl's bookstores.
Right. Yes.
There's, you know, I mean, that's practically the Canadian market.
It's not available for sale at those places, and you know, Ms. Reisman has every right to decide what she sells and what she does not sell in her bookstore, and judgments are made all the time as to what is carried and what is not carried. Surely no bookseller no bookseller is sort of the equivalent of the Library of Congress. They don't carry every book that's been published. So decisions are made all the time as to what is carried and what is not carried. And in this case, in our view, we certainly agree with Ms. Reisman that it is hate literature. So from our perspective, there's no need for it to be available commercially, especially because I think its principal buyers would be people who have a propensity for neo-Nazism and white supremacism.
Is that true? Because I had to buy this book in order to do the interview today. I do think it has significance in helping. I'm certainly not attracted to neo-Nazism or white supremacy. No, certainly not. I will tell you, this book is hideous.
Right.
It's a filthy book, and I don't mean that it's pornographic.
Right.
The views exposed in this book and espoused are filthy. Absolutely filthy. But I do think it has valuable for a person like myself who wants to try to understand the genesis of hatred in the hopes that you could recognize the early signs and make sure it never happens again.
But I don't think, Rhonda, that one would get that understanding from reading this book. Surely it takes much, much more to get an understanding about the genesis of hatred. Secondly, the book is 694 pages long. I'm sure you didn't read all of it, and I'm sure that most people would not read all of it by any stretch of the imagination. So really, the copy itself, in its raw form, I think would be of most interest to those who are studying the issue in a scholarly or educational way, and want to understand, and for those who like it, who don't consider it filthy, but on the contrary, who think it's a great idea, a great program by a great man.
Okay, I want to talk to you more, but first we have to take a quick commercial break. Our phone line's already busy today. The numbers to call 905-332-3131 or 416-203-0302. Back right after this. Welcome back to Rhonda Live. Mein Kampf, Hitler's book. You won't be able to find this on the shelves of Indigo or Chapters stores. The store's CEO, Heather Reisman, said it's hate literature and decided to pull it off the shelves. The question we're asking today, should this book be available? Is banning it the way to go? Our phone lines are open. The numbers to call 905-332-3131 or 416-203-0302. Our phone lines are very, very busy, Manuel, so let's go right to Amy on line one. Sure. Go ahead, Amy. You're on the air.
Oh, hi, Rhonda.
Hi, Amy.
I'd like to say that although I agree that the book is vile and absolutely filthy, I agree with your words exactly. And the person who wrote the book was just a horrendous individual in this world. I don't agree with the decision to take it off the bookshelves, and I have to say that because I think by doing that, it's created more notoriety around the book. Mm-hmm. People always want what they can't have, especially young people with impressionable minds. They're now going to go underground and on the internet to get the book, and they're going to want to know why. You know, I got to find out why I can't read this book. So it creates more notoriety around the book. If they had just let it go, not said anything about it, the book probably wouldn't have sold. Anybody who really wants it anyways is going to be able to get it over the internet. It's readily available.
Amy, thank you so much for your phone call. Manuel, what do you say to that argument? Because certainly only a handful, just a couple hundred of these books are sold every year in Canada, something like 1,500 in the whole United States.
No, 1,500 in Canada.
Okay.
Around 15,000 in the United States.
So we're talking, you know, just a mere handful of these books. So why bother banning it? And what about Amy's argument that this is only going to create interest? For instance, I had to go out and buy a copy of this book so I could do the show today.
Absolutely. Well, in my view, really, the interest created is of a very short lifespan. So I don't think that that argument really would be valid for anything beyond the next 24 or 48 hours. In the notoriety that it got, I mean, in many ways, it is the media that has given it that notoriety. I mean, Ms. Reisman simply decided to take it off her shelves. She didn't announce it, she didn't make a public pronouncement about this, nor did she make a big deal about it. It is the media that has made, sort of, in my view, a mountain out of a molehill by spinning it that it is banning and that it is censorship, when it is not.
A decision, you say it's just a decision not to sell.
It's a decision not to sell. It's available elsewhere. It's available in bookstores still in Canada, or you can go to your neighborhood library and read it if you so choose.
I suppose the media's interest in this and their concern is where do you stop? Where do you draw the line? Are you going to ban the Quran next? Because
I think
it incites violence against infidels.
No,
or what about the Bible?
Right. No, I mean, I think we shouldn't even be thinking in terms of making comparisons like that. They're just totally inappropriate and not valid. The Bible, the Quran, of course, are the fundamental books of two great religions. We're not talking about literature here either. What we're talking about is the political manifesto of you know, one of the most evil individuals in the 20th century or in any century. And that's the issue. So, and in terms of the book helping to understand, as you were indicating yourself, Rhonda, you have read a biography of Hitler recently. Well, there are innumerable books written about Hitler, and nobody, in many ways, despite all the studying and so on, has somehow come to understand it. But it requires a tremendous deal of study to even approach a measure of understanding. So to suggest that by going and reading his political manifesto, which was written in 1925 and 1926, etc., it is naive to believe that that is going to give us very much insight into Hitler, into his mind, into his motivation, and so on, since there's been arguments about that going on for many, many years.
Okay, our phone's so busy. Let's go to Pauline on line 8. Go ahead, Pauline, you're on the air.
Yes, I'd like to commend the bookstores for removing that book, especially at this time when we have so much emphasis on violence, and I know it's probably not right to say it will always be banned, but there are many individuals that do not care about good or evil. They're just intent on having the value of the book, getting the price for it, and I would like to say that I would like to see God honored more in literature. Thank you.
Pauline, thank you so much for your phone call. Who is to decide, though, which books are worthy of being sold in Canada and which books are not?
Well, obviously the people who make those decisions are the ones who sell it.
But particularly when you have control of so much of the Canadian market.
Right. But as you said yourself, that the number of people who actually buy it is very small. So the impact really, irrespective of how much control she has of the Canadian market, I think it's a very, very small impact. I mean, there are just a few people who buy it, so they can't buy it. They'll have to sort of take an extra bus ride to go to another store or to go to their library. So really, I think, again, a great deal is being made of what basically was what we considered a commendable act of conscience by a particular bookseller. After all, in the current world, we're always speaking about CEOs and their social responsibility. We speak about CEOs of companies that they should be concerned about the environment, that they should be concerned about their companies not dealing with slave labor and so on. So here is a CEO who, acting in her conscience, has decided that she doesn't want hate literature in her stores.
Okay, we have to take a quick commercial break. Our phone lines are open. I want to take as many phone calls as possible. I want to hear a wide range of views today. The number to call, 416-203-0302. Back with more right after this. Welcome back. Phone line's very, very busy today. The question we're asking today, should this book, Mein Kampf, the manifesto of Adolf Hitler, should it be banned from Indigo and Chapters bookstores? The CEO, Heather Reisman, says the answer is yes, and as a matter of fact, that's a decision that she's made. Phone line's very, very busy today, Manuel, so let's go right to Bruce on line 5. Go ahead, Bruce, you're on the air.
Hello there.
Hi, Bruce.
Hi there. Thanks very much for taking my call. I think Ms. Reisman is completely out of line. I think that she is completely underestimating the consumers of Canada, the sophistication and the intellect of the average person who can certainly make a decision for themselves when they go into a bookstore what they want to read and what they not want to read. It is certainly not up to her and should not be left up to her to create her vision of what people should be able to digest, and certainly we understand the issues about Mr. Hitler and about Mein Kampf, but clearly it's not Ms. Reisman's role either as a retailer or an entrepreneur to be setting the standards for what we should be able to read. I think this would bring us back to what Ray Bradbury so aptly put in his fantastic book and movie Fahrenheit 451, where the state and others began to ban books, and I think it's just absolutely deplorable that Ms. Reisman has taken that position.
Bruce, thank you so much for your phone call. Your response to that, Manuel?
Well, number one, every bookseller makes a decision as to what merchandise he or she carries. No bookstore carries all the books that are published in any given year or throughout history. They're not the Library of Congress.
She's also taken this off of her online services.
Yes, exactly.
So you can't even order this book.
Correct, correct. But I'm saying every person in the business, Bruce is saying Ms. Reisman shouldn't decide what is or what isn't sold in their store. People can make up their own minds as to what they want to buy and what they don't want to buy. But no retailer carries everything that everybody wants. I mean, I might decide that for one reason or another I don't want to carry Armani shirts in my store. Well, you have the right, yes, you want to wear an Armani shirt, go and find it in a store that sells it. So I really don't buy Bruce's argument at all in this regard. And furthermore, as I think when especially these days we try to speak about social consciences on the part of CEOs, when we speak of CEOs being conscious about the environment, conscious about not using products that are done with slave labor, etc. Well, here is a CEO who is showing a social conscience by saying, I don't want hate literature in my stores. It's not a matter of what people want to buy. She, as the owner of these stores, finds it offensive to have this book in her stores, and she doesn't want to produce it, just like somebody else might decide, look, I am not going to have material that is produced by child labor. I don't care if people like the pants or people like the shirts, etc. I'm not going to sell that because on principle I'm against it.
All right, our phone's so busy today. Let's go to Adam on line 1. Go ahead, Adam, you're on the air.
Hi, I just want to say, this book should not be banned. It has historical significance, and we should learn from our mistakes. By reading this book, many Germans could have noticed that Hitler, when he came to power, was going to persecute the Jews if they would have read it. And if by banishing it, we cannot learn from our mistakes, and we cannot predict future tyrants who will take over the world.
Adam, thank you so much for your phone call. Appreciate your thoughts. Will you say that this book does have historical significance? So shouldn't people be allowed to read it?
Absolutely. I mean, nobody's speaking about people not being allowed to read this book. All we're speaking about is whether it should
really
be carried.
to buy it.
It's whether it should be carried. Well, exactly. But if buying something doesn't, it's not the only way to access a book. We do have libraries where you can go and find the book. And we're speaking here about a decision by one bookseller. Again, admittedly, a large bookseller, but that does not stop other booksellers from carrying it. So nobody's being denied the opportunity of reading these 694 pages of very poorly written but very murderous material in there. And I would venture to say that most people, ordinarily, who want to learn about Hitler and Nazism and so on, are not going to learn it from this book. And if they buy it, they're not going to read the 694 pages of it. They're not going to read 50 pages of it, perhaps, or 100 pages of it. So one has to question what would lead somebody specifically to buy it. So our point of view is it doesn't have to be carried commercially.
But if you're trying to understand what probably is incomprehensible, the mind of Adolf Hitler, what was in his mind, why he did what he did, what better source than his own words? As poorly written as they may be, what better source?
Well, as I say, it would be good to believe that by simply reading this book, we would have an insight into Adolf Hitler's mind. But as I've indicated, hundreds of books have been written attempting to penetrate Adolf Hitler's mind, based not only on the reading of this book, but based on very, very thorough studies of his writings, his statements, and what he has actually done over the years. So this book, in and of itself, is not going to give you an insight into that. And the other thing is, we have to look at things in historical context. We can't sort of erase the last 50 years, let us say, of history. So probably it would have been best if this book had been read by more people before he became chancellor in 1933, and people had taken it seriously. After that, it became extremely popular because Nazism happened to be dominating a very good part of the world.
And not only that, it became mandatory. You were forced to buy the book. Up until then, only a handful of copies were sold.
Now, this book, unlike when it was published, carries tremendously heavy historical baggage.
Okay.
And so we can't just look at it in isolation as if it were a book that was just published yesterday, and it'd be important for us to have a look and see what Mr. Hitler thinks.
Okay, let's go to Bill on line 7. Go ahead, Bill, you're on the air.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Bill.
I think it's completely wrong that the book should be banned. It's an important book. I disagree with everything that's in it. I have read it because I found it important to understand the period. What it says to me on the comments of what's happening is that the Canadian Jewish Congress and other Jewish organizations have failed in their attempt to educate the general public in the dastardly acts of Hitler. I think it's important to know how this man worked. And to deny that right, it's similar to the Canadian Customs banning literature, books going into Little Sisters or Glad Day Books in Toronto that deal with any gay or lesbian things. I mean, it's in the same area. Thank you.
Bill, thank you so much for your phone call.
It is not in the same area. Customs Canada interdicting a book, and that's another issue, and we can discuss that. But Customs Canada is the government. Heather Reisman,
which makes it a censorship issue.
Heather Reisman is not the government. She owns a series of bookstores. So to say that it's the same is completely false and has absolutely no relevance whatsoever to the discussion. And again, people keep using the word ban. The book is not banned. It is available for people who want to read it, and it's available for people who want to buy it. It is only not available at Indigo in Chapters and online, etc. But it is not banned. It is available.
Manuel Prutschi, our time is gone, but thank you so much for joining us today on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Don't go away. We're going to continue this conversation. We're going to hear from the Freedom Party of Ontario when we come back, and our phone lines are open. We'll take more of your phone calls right after these messages. Stay tuned. My next guest today says banning Mein Kampf from bookstores sets a bad precedent. We're joined in studio by Robert Metz. He's a founding member of the Freedom Party of Ontario. Robert, you say this is not a censorship issue, but it is very unfortunate that this has happened. Explain that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me be clear from the outset that certainly it is the right of any bookseller to sell whatever product they want to. They don't even have to sell books. They could sell celery if that's what they want to sell. So no one here is contesting the right of anyone to sell or not sell a particular book. But I find it most unfortunate to remove a book like this. This is not merely, quote, hate literature. This is a statement that was made by a political leader at a time that drew the world into a war for many years and killed millions of people. And it is much more than a statement of hatred. It's a statement of a belief in the absolute state, a statement in the support of sacrifice to the common good and to the government. It's a statement of socialism. Hitler was a socialist. And for us to just brush this aside and leave it to the academics, which, by the way, is like leaving the dangerous dynamite in the middle of the cesspool, because that's where all the bad ideas come from, because it's usually in the academic circles, and that's where it started in Germany as well, was in the so-called intellectual circles, where ideas of Marxism and the philosophies of Kant and Hegel, which were the backup philosophies of everything Hitler said, and yet we're not talking about banning those philosophers, you know, where would it stop? There just wouldn't be an end to it. And it would seem to me that if you really want to say something about why Hitler's ideas were so evil, you would promote perhaps a book that actually says that. Like I would recommend Leonard Peikoff's Ominous Parallels, which I happen to have been reading this week, and this literally takes Mein Kampf apart piece by piece and explains why it is such an evil book and why we have to be careful about the ideas in that book, because they're coming to North America in very subtle and insidious ways. I mean, race hatred is a consequence of collectivism, of a government that treats everyone as a member of a group rather than treating them as an individual. Race hatred is not a primary. It's at the end of the chain. So we have to understand the nature of government, that as soon as we start using government to take money or rights or privileges from one group of people and handing them to another, the natural reaction of those people is to start hating each other, because one group is benefiting at the expense of another, and then they start making excuses. It turns into race hatred, ethnic hatred, religious hatred, you name it. And it all starts at the same core issue. It's always the government getting involved, dividing its public, you know, handing benefits out to one group or another. And it's very unfortunate that especially you know, a Jewish group would want to hide this kind of information. You'd think they'd be, look at this book, you know, we don't want to see any more of this, understand it. And I think the average person is capable of understanding why the book is evil if they read it.
Wow, it's very graphic. It's filthy. It's ugly, and but it's amazing.
You know what the biggest sin of the book is in my eyes? It's boring. It's utterly boring, irrational trash, really.
And it's badly written too.
And I don't know how anybody can even get through it and gain anything from it. There's nothing to be learned from it. There's only the lesson of history to be learned. But to understand that, you have to look at the larger philosophical issues behind government.
Well, you say this is, rather than a censorship issue, this is really an issue of trying to be politically correct. And you say the irony is that really the Nazis stood for the exact same thing, a sanctioned viewpoint that excludes all others.
Political correctness is, in fact, if you politics is force, government is force, and when we use the term political correctness, we're saying forced correctness. And that's what Hitler believed in. In a free society, we have to have the right to disagree with one another and go our separate ways. We have to have the right to express our hatreds. I know that sounds extreme, but you know, there is a line to draw. We do not tolerate the initiation of force in a free society by one person or one group against another. And that's where you have to draw the line. That's the only way you can stay civilized. As soon as you start censoring ideas, you are missing the whole point. The only way to fight a bad idea is with better ideas. You don't make that bad idea go away by brushing it under the carpet and saying we're not going to sell it anymore, or we don't want people to know about it, or we're going to leave it to the academics. These are the very conditions that will flourish for this type of thinking, you know, and we got to avoid that.
Robert, our phone's so busy today. Let's go to Vishnu on line 6. Go ahead, Vishnu, you're on the air.
Hi there. I was actually had a comment for the previous guest, but you touched on similar issues. It was just that it wasn't necessarily an issue of censorship, but by pulling the book off the shelves, Indigo and / Chapters now, they're some of the biggest booksellers in Canada, and for a lot of people, it's the only booksellers in Canada. And the previous gentleman was saying, your guest is saying now, you need to look at these things, you need to look and analyze. You can see, I've read like most of the book. I couldn't really get through it myself. It's badly written. It's quite horrendous stuff. But and anyone with the impression the last guest was getting is somebody would go, they would buy the book and then think, what a good idea myself. And if you were a Nazi per se, you wouldn't need to go buy this book to further your own thoughts. I think most people who are interested in buying this book is someone like myself who's read Ian Kershaw's decent history of Hitler, or is someone just interested in what would make somebody do something like this. It's history. It's you study every bit of history, not just the good bits.
Yes, Vishnu, thank you so much for your phone call. Your response to that?
I agree. Again, in order to know what the good ideas are, you have to know what the bad ideas are. You have to allow that contrast. You have to allow freedom of speech. I mean, that's the whole antithesis of what the Nazis were all about. They didn't allow freedom of speech. In fact, they went beyond censorship. They went into state-funded propaganda, telling people what they had to think and how to think. It was a little disturbing to hear your previous guest say that he wouldn't mind Mein Kampf sold as long as the proper annotations were in the corner. Well, you know, that sort of assumes that the people who are reading it don't have enough common sense to discern right from wrong. If that's the case, I mean, if that's true, then it's already too late. Our society is doomed if our people are so shallow and so prejudicial that we have to worry about an ancient book like this in our midst, as though it's going to threaten us somehow. I can't see it.
Let's go to Jeanette on line 1. Go ahead, Jeanette, you're on the air.
Yes, hello. I've been holding for quite a while, and I did have a comment for the speaker who was on your show before. And I want to say that if Heather Reisman feels that she needs to pull it off her shelves, off her own store, I think she has every right, especially because she is Jewish, and because this man was responsible for murdering 12 million people. As your previous, the person on the show said, you can still get it, you can attain it, you can buy it in a different store, in a different place. But I also feel that we should draw the line somewhere that hate literature should never be classified as freedom of speech. I mean, this person wanted to wipe out a whole race, and we still have that going on in different forms today with blacks, with
But here's the thing, though. How do you label, and this is a really difficult definition, how do you label anything hate literature? Because by the same definition that this book, Mein Kampf, was pulled off of the bookshelves at Indigo and Chapters, you could also use the exact same reasoning to not sell. If the word ban is offensive, we'll say you might choose not to sell the Koran or even the Bible.
Or the Bible, or, you know, Karl Marx's Das Kapital, which was an impassioned hatred of the middle class. That's why he called them the bourgeoisie. It was an impassioned hatred of capitalism and of the business class of people. Are we going to remove these books? I don't think that's the wise thing to do. I think the thing to do is to shine the light of day upon them, not to hide them under the carpet where we can't see them, and then we don't know that we're being influenced by those ideas. This is part of what Leonard Peikoff is trying to do in his book, is to illustrate how many of the very things that the philosophers who drove the ideology of the Nazis, many of those same things are being said in North America by many of our politicians and people in public office. And unless you can see the parallel and understand why the things are happening in the country, we're never going to understand politics or history on the basis of hatred. And to speak to the point about freedom of speech being different from allowing hate literature, freedom of speech is different. Hate literature is hate literature, but to allow freedom of speech, you have to tolerate hate literature. You just have to. You can't start drawing lines and saying that this is hate literature, this isn't, this is, this isn't, and then the next thing you know, you have to establish the same kind of mechanism that Hitler relied on, a mechanism that creates censorship, that prevents some people from expressing their points of views, allows other people to express their points of views, and then you get a completely one-sided philosophy coming out in a society, and everyone knows where that leads to. It's been repeated many, many times. So, you know, to say that we should ban literature because it's offensive is the last of the reasons in the world to ban literature.
Okay, we have to take a quick commercial break. We'll be back with more of your phone calls. The numbers to call, 905-332-3131 or 416-203-0302. Back right after these messages. Our phone's so busy today. Let's go right to Ian on line 1. Go ahead, Ian. You're on the air.
Hello.
Hi, Ian.
I'd like to admire both your guests' positions. I agree that this is a personal decision that's been made, and she has the right to do that. Whether it's a good decision or not it is another matter. But what I'd like to bring up is that there was an appellate court decision in the United States just yesterday which effectively strikes down the First Amendment. And I don't think awareness of that has seeped through to the public quite yet. A publisher of a website, www.2600.com, has been prevented by the court from linking to other sites that talk about matters that corporate interests don't want talked about. And that was just upheld in the appellate court, which effectively means that freedom of speech, even in the United States, where it's you know, sort of enshrined in the fabric of their nation, is gone.
Ian, thank you so much for the phone call. I'm not familiar with the case that he's talking about.
I hadn't heard about that specific case myself, but it's true. Freedom of speech has been an ideal in the U.S. and in Canada to a relative degree, but there have always been incidents of censorship. I mean, everything from Huckleberry Finn on up has been attempted to be censored at some time. But the key point is, you know, when we're talking about freedom of speech, if freedom of speech does not mean to allow the most offensive literature available to be available, then it means nothing. Because to say that, well, we believe in freedom of speech just so long as it's a speech we agree with and that we feel comfortable with and that doesn't disturb us or bother us, well, that's the opposite of free speech. You're just talking out of two sides of your mouth. You can't be saying that statement. Again, to counter a bad idea, we have to counter it with a better idea. And generally, I have found that when people are given 2 alternatives, 3 alternatives, maybe 4, and get to see them side by side, then they can generally pick the best one. But even a good idea standing by itself, not compared to any bad ideas, it's difficult to determine whether it's a good idea and why. And so it comes to the fundamentals of epistemology, I guess, our knowledge, of understanding how to think about things, how to relate to issues in politics, so that it's very important that these ideas are always contrasted. That's something I do even with our political party. I mean, if people go to our site, they might think they're going to get a one-sided diatribe of the issues. They don't. They get a multi-sided view of political issues, because we think that's how the final proper result will be arrived at. But it's very important to understand that in Canada today as well, and this is pre-September 11th and before all of this, that there's all kinds of legislation going down that is seriously violating our rights to privacy, to security of person. Bill 30, for example, in Ontario is being passed right now under the guise of terrorist activity, which allows the government to literally take your property away without due process. And even if you're found innocent, they get to keep it. And this is written literally in the law. It's as literal as anything Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf, and yet the public accepts it in the same spirit in which the German public accepted Hitler's ideas back then, because they don't relate to the effect. They think, well, it doesn't affect me. You know, there's that statement from World War II. First they came for the Jews, but I wasn't Jewish, so I didn't bother, you know. Then they came for the blacks, and then they came for the homosexuals and things like that. And it wasn't just the Jewish people that Hitler hated. It was a whole list of, quote, anybody that wasn't undesirable. And again, it was a complete antithesis of individual rights. It was the complete ideal of the state as being the supreme over the individual. And although I don't ever expect history to repeat itself the way it did in Germany, I don't think we're ever going to see that again. But there's a saying that says, you know, history may not repeat itself, but it always rhymes. And so that you might not get the same exact symptom. What we're seeing in Canada today is not so much anti-Semitism as other issues. You know, it's almost like, well, political correctness is almost the whole thing reversed. It's like you're in the Jewish position if you're a white Anglo-Saxon male anymore in Canada or the States now. And that's very dangerous too. And it's mostly, you see it on our campuses, this politically correct philosophy going on. And it's part of, I think, the zero tolerance philosophy. You know, we're not going to tolerate anything that we don't agree with, which translates into 100% intolerance, which is exactly what Nazism was all about.
Our phone's so busy. Let's go to Sharif on line 6. Go ahead, Sharif. Are you there?
Hi, yes, I am.
Hi, Sharif. Go ahead.
Yes, I am listening to your guest speaking, and I guess I disagree somewhat. I totally agree in freedom of speech, but I also agree with Heather Reisman for pulling the book. And saying that is just, and I feel that Canadians,
really inconsistent.
Canadians, yeah, you may say so, but I feel that Canadians in general take things too lightly. I think that what happened on September 11th is just another part of our laissez-faire attitude towards criminals, and Hitler was a criminal, and these people that conducted September 11th are criminals, and I see a parallel in that stuff, and I see that our attitude towards just being so laissez-faire and think that just the way we are, and it just let people that of criminal mind infiltrate us because we think that there is this need to just be so fair and really.
Well, Sharif, though, what about trying to understand the criminal mind? What about this book having it available as a historical tool?
I kind of disagree with this interpretation. Germany at the time, Hitler was very much into going after the, quote, criminals. I mean, it was a very, very strict society. The only thing was that things that could be regarded as crime could just be being something, being a businessman, being Jewish, being gay, being whatever group of society that was considered to be not wanted at the time. So to suggest that there wasn't, I mean, laissez-faire had nothing to do with Adolf Hitler. Laissez-faire was the absolute opposite of the controlled society. And I think laissez-faire is normally applied to economics, not so much to criminal activity. I mean, yes, there's no such thing as absolute protection from terrorists and criminals. We can only have recursive protection against them. We can call the police or whoever after the crime has been committed. But in the case of someone like Adolf Hitler, I mean, he was elected by a legal majority of Germans at the time. Mein Kampf sold over 200,000 copies prior to his election. People knew basically what they were getting, and they accepted it because it was part of the prevailing philosophy of the time, and that's what drives everything. If it hadn't been Adolf Hitler, it would have been someone else because Europe was just ready to explode as that powder keg, you know, with all the statism, which doesn't work well with a bunch of individuals who want to be free.
Robert Metz, our time is gone, but I want to thank you so much for joining us today on the show. You bring up some really, really excellent points.
Thanks a lot.
And my apologies to all the callers who tried to get through today. Our phones were very, very busy. Obviously, I didn't have a chance to take everything about that. Don't go away. We'll be right back with more Rhonda Live after these messages. Stay tuned. Finally today, the holidays may be especially poignant for New Yorkers this year as the city attempts to return to normal. And all around the Big Apple, it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. CNN's Ginny Mose shows us some of the old traditions and new additions to Christmas in New York.
Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and Rudolph Giuliani have something in common, hero status. So it's only fitting the mayor got his own set of antlers in the Christmas windows at Barney's department store.
We were going to do a red nose on Rudolph, and then I thought it's going to make him look like he's a heavy drinker or something like that, and he's not.
Rudolph, with your nose so bright, won't you guide my sleigh tonight?
Then how New Yorkers loved him, even in antlers.
We like him in anything right now.
For weeks after September 11th, the windows of Saks Fifth Avenue were filled with sadness, but now
The little tree dreamed of being a Christmas tree.
Most of the big stores have returned to traditional holiday windows. References to the tragedy might depress shoppers. And the mechanized displays are created months in advance. So only Barney's went out on a limb with Rudolph the Right-On Reindeer.
This is a quote from him on his antlers. "We have never been braver, we've never been stronger."
The mayor stopped by Barney's the other day to urge folks to spend. As for Rudy the Reindeer...
I love that likeness that you have of Babe Ruth in the window. It looks great. Was that me? That was you.
Even the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree was wearing the stars and stripes, at least until the scaffolding came down. The tree lighting ceremony has been a tradition since 1933.
Merry Christmas!
The lights go on, but how do they get on? I mean, this is just like doing your tree at home.
You get tired of doing your tree at home after doing this.
For 8 days, nearly 30 workers string more than 30,000 lights, working from scaffolding. What floor is this that we're on? It feels like being up in a treehouse in the middle of Manhattan, listening to music from the skating rink below. You can't blame birds for landing here.
We found a bat one year.
You found a bat? And that's not all. Bill Abadi has decorated the tree for 40 years. One of his most memorable moments came as he was splicing wire.
There's an owl sitting there watching me work, and they said that the owl came down from Canada with the tree.
The owl ended up at the Bronx Zoo. What's wrong with that limb?
It's too ugly for the Rockefeller tree.
This tree even has its own fire protection.
So this is the sprinkler system, and then it can come out these holes.
What a relief to trim the tree, dress the windows in a town where the sledding has been rough.
Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer, you'll go down in history. You'll go down in history.
Jeannie Moe, CNN, New York.
Don't go away. I'll be right back with more Rhonda Live after these messages. Stay tuned.